This has not been easy. Hey, it's Romania Black, and we are on the top 2022 Top Husbando of the Year. Yeah, I've been dreading recording this video for a long time because if you've seen this bracket, you know that the Sweet 16 on down to the top round, it's gonna get bloody. So I've poured myself a beverage that is fit for a bloodbath because that is what this is going to be. This was not kind. And what this is this bracket was made up. I took a poll way back in February, like 4 months ago, asking patrons to vote for their top husbandos. And the caveat was it had to be from series that I had either read or watched up until this point. And so, obviously, if I do this again next year, one, I'm going to start the nominations like in November, not February. Thinking I foolishly thought I'd be done by March if I started in February. Bad idea. I'll start them like in November, the nominations. But hopefully, if I do this again next year, there'll be more shows that I've watched since this bracket was put together that we can add even more husbandos on there as well. So that's really fun. But yeah, so these were top husbandos voted for by patrons. I had 64 candidates narrowed down for the bracket, and we've slowly narrowed down to our top 16, our Sweet 16. And tonight we are going to narrow down from our Sweet 16 to our final round. I did this with the waifus a few weeks ago. It was a lot of fun, but I'll be honest, the husbandos I have dreaded because these rounds are ridiculous. Y'all did not make this easy. The way you all voted in the bracket worked out. Will there be some upsets? Probably. Will you guys forgive me? Hopefully. But will this be a fun time? I should hope so. So, let's do this, y'all. We are going to start with our Sweet 16. 8 rounds of husbandos to narrow down to our final 8. Then to our semifinals, the top 4, down to our finals, the top 2. And the caveat, of course, is that whoever wins the top husbando this year will not be eligible for next year. So, who will it be? I don't know. I'll be honest, when it comes down to the final, I still haven't picked the winner. So I was like, no, when we do the final, we'll bring Whiteboard Kun out and we'll have to go from there. We'll probably bring Whiteboard Kun out before the final, but we'll definitely need his help for the final round because I'll be honest, I have not picked the winner for the final yet. I couldn't decide before recording this. I'm like, we'll figure it out as I record. It'll be perfectly fine. So we're going to start with our Sweet 16. Now, for this round, in the past rounds, we've talked about how hot these husbandos are. We've talked about them being good communicators, good listeners, but we've talked in the last round, the top 32, about the potential of relationships with our husbandos. But this round is going to specifically focus on these relationships. It's going to focus on 3 key factors. We're going to talk about the current canon and subtextual relationships. So if it's not canon, it's the fan subtext that we think is canon. We're going to talk about that, the stability of said relationship, as well as the ability to support their partner, because every good husbando should be able to support you and keep you safe. And then finally, there is the fan service factor. I mean, at this point, all these guys are good looking, but how good looking we talking here? So let's break down our Sweet 16 and Godspeed, because I'm probably going to make some enemies with the results of this round. So, round 1. Ooh, Gojo going into this, he has been a fan favorite. He's been the #1 seed going into this entire tournament. And so he, unfortunately for Jishin, he gets put up against Gojo in this Sweet 16 round. Now, I will say this, Modao Zushi is a much more romantically inclined series than Jujutsu Kaisen, which has virtually no romance whatsoever. It's more of an action shonen. So we're looking at 2 series from very different genres. But with that being said, it's actually interesting how similar these 2 characters are. Both are in love with quite shady individuals with complicated pasts, from what I know. Now, what is going to hurt Gojo going into this entire bracket is that I've only watched season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. I am an anime only. I have not read the manga, so I cannot take any manga content into account when looking at Gojo. That's going to be his biggest detriment. Now, come back next year when I've watched season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Maybe a totally different story, right? But for right now, Gojo, all I know about him is that I've heard from the fandom he's had a shady relationship with Geto. That's all I know. I know nothing about their relationship other than that him and Geto may have had like a subtextual fanon relationship. Okay. And Geto's one of our villains. So then you have Jishin, who has the fanon subtextual relationship with Yao, who is one of the villains, if not the villain of the series. Or villain is I put it in quotation marks because if you watch the series, you know what I mean. But they're both kind of shadier individuals that have very complicated pasts and motivations. So they're kind of similar in that regard. So looking at their relationship status, we can't really, it's like comparing apples and oranges. There's not really one of the two that stands out. Now, obviously, at this point, I've read the entirety of Mode Azushi, and I know that there's more of a relationship developed between Jishin and Yao, but it's not explicitly romantic. It's just them having a friendship and a brotherly camaraderie. So what can we do with that? And you could kind of argue that Gojo has a similar relationship maybe with Nanami as well as Geto. So... And then, of course, he, like, takes on Fushiguro under his wing. So, as far as relationships goes, they both are... I would say Jishin has a little bit of the upper hand in terms of Category 1. When we get to the stability of the relationship and the ability to support their partner, they both have immense power, either as a cultivator or as a jujitsu sorcerer. And so they're definitely able to support their partner. I mean, Gojo is ridiculously strong, like probably one of the more OP characters in the series, at least in season 1 he's led to believe to be. And Jishin's no slouch. He definitely has enough power that he would be able to support his partner no matter what. So they're kind of on equal footing in terms of that. And then you have the fan service factor. And personalities aside, I'm sorry, Jishin has a lot of fan service, but have you been on Twitter? Gojo is ridiculous. There is so much fan service with Gojo, whether it's the hollow purple from season 1, whether it's those creepy doll-like eyes that some people think are gorgeous. I find them creepy personally, but that's neither here nor there. But Gojo gets a lot of fan service. He is one of the more fan servicey characters, I feel, that Akutami has created. And so in the series, which is hilarious because the mangaka clearly has a disdain for Gojo to begin with, so it's funny. But I would say Gojo definitely has more fan service than Jishin does. Now, those that are hardcore Mode Azushi fans are likely to argue with me, but I think in terms of in the context of the story itself, Gojo is treated more fan servicey than Jishin is. I will say that. So we have Jishin that kind of excels more in the relationship category. You have Gojo that excels more in the fan service, and then they both kind of come at stability from a similar angle. So what are we going to do? Well, we'd have to go to a tiebreaker, and Gojo, I did one final poll on Patreon to see where these characters stood at, and Gojo had a solid percent of the votes. If we're gonna get out the actual paperwork and see, yeah, Gojo had a solid 10% of the vote, like a good solid 10% over Jishin, who came in with 3% of the vote. So, unfortunately, Jishin, you are a cultivator in our hearts, and we love you as a husbando, but Gojo is going to advance on to the quarterfinals and take out Jishin for this first round of the Sweet 16. Now, next, gonna make some enemies! And that is two characters that I love dearly from the series that they are in. Hawk and Wushin. Hawk from Yona of the Dawn and Wei Wushin from Mode Azushi. Why? Why do I have to pit these two against each other? I hate it. This is the problem. Both of them have amazing relationships with their partners. Yona of the Dawn and Mode Azushi have action and mystery and intrigue in them, but they're both also romances. So we definitely get some romance in both of these series with both of these characters. They both have amazing relationships with their partners. Both stories are slow burns. So it's like the feelings are there, but it's a slow burn. Now, I do know that Mode Azushi ends up having the slow burn pays off, right? And I'm assuming Yona of the Dawn will be too. I'm 22 volumes into Yona of the Dawn at this point. I'm assuming it will as well. But so in terms of stability to support their partner, this is where there is a little bit of difference. A little slight bit of difference. Now, Wei Wushin, I would argue Wei Wushin and Hawk both are fully capable of physically supporting their partner. Absolutely. Wei Wushin is the Yingling Patriarch. He has the ability to use demonic cultivation. Hawk is the Thunder Beast. They are clearly super powerful characters that would be able to support you physically and during battle and protect you. But when it comes to fiscally supporting their partner, I will say this. Wei Wushin, he relies on his partner Wanji as a sugar daddy quite a lot. Wushin does not have the financial support and stability. Gojo in the last round was a freaking rich boy. Jishin was a rich boy. They both had the means financially to support their partners. Wushin, nope. He's pretty reliant upon his partner Wanji for literally everything. Whereas Hawk, you could argue, well, Hawk has denounced the Wind Tribe, but yeah, Hawk also has the Wind Tribe at his back, so if he really desperately needed something, he could go get it to him. Now, does that mean he depends on the Wind Tribe? Yes, so I guess they are a little bit more similar. However, I will say that Wushin relies on Wanji a lot. Hawk does not rely on Yona very much. So there is that specific difference. You could argue that Wushin has the Zhang clan to fall back on, but that also means he has to go interact with Chang, and he doesn't want to do that either. So you're kind of looking at it from different perspectives, but I would argue that Wushin relies a little bit more on Wanji than Hawk relies upon Yona. So there is a little bit of distinction there that kind of goes into Hawk's favor. And then we have the fan service factor, and there is an insane amount of fan service for both of them. Hawk does combine a few more of the criteria together, I feel. If you've seen Hawk's fan service, it's pretty darn good. Wushin's is as well. So it's very, very hard. And so I had to look at the Patreon votes, and it came down to a 1% difference between these two characters. Hawk had 6% of the vote, and Wushin had 5%. That's how close it was. But I think that just based on the criteria and the vote, Hawk is going to be the one that advances into the quarterfinals. And several people have argued, they're like, why wasn't Wushin in the waifu category? And I'm like, well, because y'all didn't vote to put him there. So next year, put him in the waifu category, and we'll do something different. But for this quarterfinal, Hawk is going to advance from him versus Wushin. But I love you, Wushin, our Yeeling Patriarch. I'm sorry you didn't make it through. Maybe next year you'll be put against somebody easier. So I will say, going into these next couple of rounds, there is going to be spoilers talked about. So if you do not want to be spoiled by any of these series, I would skip ahead, because I will be talking about spoilers from what I've watched or read so far. This next round is difficult. Very difficult. And that is Victor from Yuri on Ice versus Makoto Tachibana from Free. Two of my comfort animes come together, and two of my favorite characters from those comfort animes coming together. So, can't we all win? Can't we just have both sides win? But we cannot do that. So we need to look at these characters pretty substantially. I will say this. Victor and Makoto, while neither of them have canon relationships, I will argue that both of them have very long and layered complex relationships with the male characters that they are in the series with, to the point where the fandom literally considers them canon. So we can argue the fan subtextual relationship in this is pretty strong, if not substantiated. So they have these long layered relationships with their partners, and they would literally do anything for them. I'm fully convinced Victor and Makoto would both drop whatever they were doing to go and support their partner. They have moments, both of them do, where their communication falters. You could argue throughout Yuri on Ice that Victor has some moments where he could have communicated a little bit better with Yuri. Makoto, as we've seen in the recent movie, has moments where he really needs to communicate with Haru, and it just doesn't happen. But overall, they do react and are avid listeners and good partners to the people that they are shipped with. And so in the long run, I think that they are able to communicate with their partners well enough. So both of them are kind of even in that category. Then we have the stability of their relationships, and they both come from really great worlds. Victor being a pro skater, and Makoto like going to be like a personal trainer for swimmers. Like, both of them have steady jobs. They have a way to support their partners financially. If you've seen their apartments, they're both great. Their worlds are not in apocalyptic disasters. So win-win, right? That just makes it even more difficult, because that just means that they're both winning that category. Fun times. And so then we look at the fan service factor, and honestly, they both get a lot of fan service in their own ways. They both have like several fan arts, fan fictions devoted to them and their partners, and that makes them pretty even keel. So I went to the Patreon votes. Well, guess what? Both of them got 3%. So they're tied. So I was like, well, darn it. So I will say this. Even though both characters got 3% of the vote, there were some comments left about certain characters. And with those comments, I started to tally those up as well. And Victor did not have any patron comments related to him, but Makoto had 2. Makoto had 2 that were tied to him, 2 comments that were in his favor. So I had to put that into account. And I will say this, Victor at times during the series can be a little bit self-centered and a bit of a diva, right? Whereas Makoto is going to devote all of himself to you. He is going to be making you food. He's going to be making sure that you get to your swim meet on time. He is going to come watch you at all of your swim meets. I'm rewatching Yuri on Ice right now, and there are some moments where Victor kind of like leaves Yuri at the interview and like runs off and gets distracted. I don't think Makoto would ever do that. I think he'd be solidly by your side no matter what. I feel like it's hard, but watching both Yuri on Ice and Free, Victor is the partner that you dream of being able to date, and it may seem out of reach, but Makoto feels like the husbando that you wouldn't have to raise yourself up to be able to be with. So Makoto barely takes it. And if we looked at the original seeds before this final Patreon poll, Makoto was the 5th seed and Victor was the 9th seed. So it's super hard. This is probably one of the closer rounds in the entire bracket. But Makoto is going to edge away into the quarterfinals past our boy Victor. But, oh, that was hard. That was really hard to get past that. I was not having it. So yeah, speaking of not having it, do you want to take 2 of my favorite blondes and put them up against each other and make me choose between them? How dare you, bracket? How dare you all? Vic doing Irwin versus Nanami Kento from Jujutsu Kaisen and Irwin from Attack on Titan. How dare you? I hate this because I love both of these men. They are both wonderful. I will say that in this Sweet 16 to quarterfinals, relationships had a big factor in all of this. It really, really, really did. Relationship factors had a huge impact. And so this may be an upset. This is probably going to be an upset for some people, but let's just look at it. Let's just go through and be as legit as possible. So looking at canon and subtextual relationships, Nanami's not really shipped with anybody in season 1. The only person he's kind of shipped with is Gojo, but the relationship of him and Gojo in season 1, it's really barely there, right? I mean, Gojo slips him a piece of paper with a penis on it as a joke, and then they kind of interact for like a hot second when they first meet Yuji. That's it. There's not really a lot in season 1. I mean, there's the bread shop girl. I feel like most of us in the audience want to ship ourselves with Nanami Kento. That's who we want to ship ourselves with. We don't want Nanami shipped with anybody else. But there's just not a lot of romantic relationships in season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen to begin with. And there's really not a lot with Nanami. He just does not seem interested or has the time with everything going on for a romantic relationship. You compare that with Irwin, who, his non-canon relationship with Levi, it has so much subtext there that I don't even think I need to start. But even though it's not technically canon, there is a big, deep support network there. And I think that Irwin is much more closely tied to Levi and has a much more developed, layered, and strong relationship with Levi that spans over more time than Nanami and Gojo, or at least what we know about Nanami and Gojo from season 1. Now, cut back to season 2. If Nanami gets on this bracket again and cut to season 2, I'm going to have a lot more to say, I'm sure. But I'm just going with what we know from season 1. And I have a lot more time with Irwin. We have 3 seasons with Irwin to kind of explore his character in a lot more depth. So that kind of gives Irwin a little bit of advantage here. Now, as far as stability in the relationship and the ability to support their partner, both of them live in extremely dangerous worlds, but both of them are highly capable of protecting and supporting their partner. Both have connections with political figures and higher-ups within the worlds that they live in, whether it's the Jiu-Jitsu Academy through Gojo or whether it's through the government in Attack on Titan. And Nanami does have Gojo that he can rely upon, but Irwin has the respect of nearly every military figure on parody. So Irwin kind of has a little bit more leeway. I feel like Irwin has a little bit more respect in his world that we know of as the audience at this point than we see with Nanami in season 1. But again, they're both pretty much in even terms as far as that category goes. And then there's the fan service. I mean, both are DILF level fan service. I don't think I could go on Twitter for 2 seconds look up Nanami fan service and Irwin Smith fan service and just find a plethora stashed before me. They're both these thick, broad, beautiful dudes. I will argue that Irwin sometimes seems more, it's weird. Nanami has this kind of like hard edge to him in every piece of fan art that I've ever seen, but Irwin Smith, it ranges from like hard ass, badass DILF energy to like this soft pillow princess. And I'm like, what is this range? What is the range that Irwin Smith carries? Is he a top? Is he a bottom? We don't know. Could he be both? Probably. It's just, we get a lot of him in terms of fan service. And Nanami has great fan service and appeal physically, but with season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen, he doesn't have as much fleshed out for him in terms of how he would be as a partner like Irwin does. Now, with the next round, my deciding factor in all of this is because Nanami did have a little bit more of the vote in this. However, the next round of this entire bracket in the quarterfinals is all about relationships. And if I'm being honest, if I had picked Nanami to win this round, there would not be a lot to talk about in the next round because there's just not any canon relationship I can talk about with him. Whereas with Irwin, I can talk about him and Levi in much more detail. So I love Nanami Kento. He is maybe my favorite character in Jujutsu Kaisen, and it is killing me. But Irwin Smith's also one of my favorite characters in Attack on Titan, so it's not killing me. But upset of the round, Irwin Smith, our 5th seed, he's going to advance to the quarterfinal. Cheers. Next, again, 2 of my favorite characters. I hate this. We have Levi from Attack on Titan versus Okawa from Haikyuu. Why is this happening? These are 2 insanely popular characters who have not canon, but literally should be canon relationships. And the insane trust between them and their would-be partners is insane. You have Levi and Irwin Smith, who we just talked about. You have Okawa and Iwaizumi, that you just... Haikyuu is a much different world than Attack on Titan. And Okawa has the advantage in terms that none of the partners he could possibly be shipped with have died. So... So there is that, but I mean, both of them are pretty much on even keel in terms of how them and their partners are described within the fandom. I mean, I think you can pull up Okawa, whether it's Iwaizumi or Ushijima or Hinata or Atsumu at this point. I think you could pull up any, subtext with him in any relationship, and it's really down to Okawa and how he meshes with them. And the same with Levi, whether it's Irwin, whether it's Hanji, whether it's Aaron, whatever it may be. So those 2 are pretty uneven terms as far as that category goes. Then you have the stability of the relationship. Now, Okawa does have a little bit of advantage at first because in the real world, he has resources that could probably support his partner. However, I would say that Oikawa's big thing that may hinder a relationship is commitment, because he is traveling the world for volleyball. And I'm pretty sure at the end of the day, volleyball is what Okawa would choose. Now, you could argue in fan fictions, like if he would choose Iwaizumi or his partner, but from the story itself, we know that Okawa is not afraid to drop everything and leave for volleyball and go wherever the world takes him as long as he can pursue his goals. Now, in that regard, Levi, yeah, he lives in a much more unstable world, and supporting you and protecting you would be a lot more difficult. However, Levi, once he gets devoted to somebody, he is devoted. He is sparing no expense to keep whatever promise you've made him take and take it to the grave. So Levi has spent this entire series in the latter half of it trying to live up to Irwin's promise that he made to him. And everything else be damned. So you have Okawa, who, while he would be a supportive partner financially, we would have to deal with that long distance relationship and possible commitment issues. Whereas Levi, if you are Levi's partner, he is like protecting you for life. It's like the penguin mating. You guys are bonded forever. So there is that to take into consideration. And then as far as fan service goes, both of them have an immense amount of fan service. I don't think I have to argue with anybody that these 2 characters are some of the most fan serviced characters in terms of the series that they are in, as well as the fan community itself. I mean, season 3, episode 1, episode 2, need I say more? Savagery, need I say more? There's so much fan service devoted to Levi and Okawa in the series that they're in, as well in the fan community. So it did have to come down to Patreon to really seal the deal, even though Levi, I do feel, has that advantage in terms of the stability factor. but Levi did have 7% of the vote versus Okawa's 3%. So with that, on top of the stability, I would have to go with Levi to advance into the quarterfinal. But Okawa, you made a good run, and I'm really sad Okawa isn't moving on because he's one of my favorites. So this next category is freaking weird. And I say that because you are dealing with two characters who share the exact same voice actor. You have Chuya from Bungo Stray Dogs, and you have Jean Kirstein from Attack on Titan. They both have the same voice actor, same voices, two different characters who are actually pretty similar. So this is a very difficult round. This was quite difficult, actually. You have, with canon of sexual relationships, Chuya has a clear advantage. Chuya has had a lot more history and focus on his relationship with Dazai, and the history there, it's pretty obvious within the series itself, as the fan community included, that Chuya and Dazai have a pretty solid fan subtextual relationship. Whereas Jean has lots of potential relationships in Attack on Titan. In this series, there's a lot. He just doesn't get a lot of development on one specifically. The most he really gets developed upon is Marco, and poor Marco died in season 1. And Mikas is not really in a place to be in a relationship with him right now. He's just getting to know Peak. Now, if Jean came back after part 3, I might have more information that would allow me to have more to talk about with our king. But right now, just having Marco to go off of, there's not really a lot. There's a lot of potential for relationships with Jean, but just not really anything cemented. However, then you have the stability of the partners. Now, both have very unstable worlds that they live in. Chuya at least has a badass ability and the Port Mafia to back him up, but it is the Port Mafia. So how much of a backup is that really? And here's the thing. If his ability gets out of hand, unless you're Dazai, you're dead. So even though he has an amazing ability, which you would be like, oh, he can protect me from anything, if that gets out of hand and he gets corruption involved, the world's ending. So unless you're Dazai, it's over. So is that really stable if he can destroy the world? Then you have Jean, who, while he doesn't necessarily have a superpower or an ability, he has amazing leadership skills. And as long as they don't do a background check on him after season 4, part 2, he probably has a future on Parody when all is said and done. So there is that to take care of. He doesn't have a possible annihilating ability, right? And then we have the fan service factor, and there is lots of fan service on both individuals. And honestly, in the revote, the vote was tied. So we both had, for both characters, 9% of the vote. So it was really high and tied for both of them. Jean genuinely wants to be a good partner, and he strives to be a husbando that their partner can rely upon. And Chuya does have insane chemistry with Dazai, but would he have the insane chemistry with anybody else? That's the question. When I went back to the original bracket, Jean was our second seed over Chuya. But I will say that in terms of being a husbando, unless you're Dazai, Chuya may not be the best husbando for anybody else. He's perfect for Dazai. He's the perfect husbando for Dazai, absolutely. But for anybody else, he's kind of dangerous. Whereas Jean, he definitely would be someone you could rely upon more in the long run. So for that reason, it was really difficult, but our King John, he wins by a sliver to advance into the quarterfinals. In the great tradition of who will be unfortunate enough to face Wanji on the bracket, we run into Ash Lynx from Banana Fish versus Lan Wanji from Modao Zushi. And yeah, they are surprisingly similar in terms of the canon subtextual relationships. You have two OTP soulmate status relationships between Wanji and Wushin and Ash Lynx and Eiji Okamura. So it's really, really difficult. However, I will say this. One story ends with a happy ending. One does not. So, also, Ash wishes he could be a cultivator. That'd be great if he could be, but he can't be. So, yeah, Wanji has a little bit of an advantage in this category, even though both couples are at, like, OTP level. So then you look at the stability and the ability to support their partner. Wanji wins this hands down. I mean, Wanji has the resources, the abilities. Boy is Gucci from Gusu. He can support you no matter what. He is our sugar daddy of Modao Zushi. Ash has street smarts and skills, but he's in an extremely dangerous world, and in the actual text itself, he has to send his love away to keep them safe. So he wouldn't exactly be a husbando that you'd want or would be able to have sticking around you all the time. So for that reason, Wanji wins the second category. And then with the fan service factor, Ash and Wanji both get a decent amount of fan service respectfully, including in their own series. Most of it has to do with their intelligence, their ability to support their partners and friends. But I would say that the extra chapters at the end of Mode Azushi make up for the lack of fan service on Wanji's part throughout the rest of the text. And I will say this, the fan service that we do get from Wanji at the extra chapters is completely consensual. So there is that. So I love Ash Link so much, and he is a wonderful, wonderful character, but Lan Wangji, he's going on to the quarterfinals and advancing forward. So our last round of the Sweet 16 is Megumi Fushiguro from Jujutsu Kaisen versus Haiji Kiyose from Run with the Wind. Now, these two are actually kind of similar because both of them, in terms of canon and subtextual relationships, Megumi's relationship isn't really established. He may have something out for Yuji, we think. Sukuna definitely has something for him, but he may have something out for Yuji, but it's not really established. Again, Jujutsu Kaisen is not a clear winner in the romance category as far as season 1 is concerned. And Haiji is not canon, but there's no denying the relationship he has with Kakeru. Like, him and Kakeru basically talk about how they love running, and running is represented by each other, so 2 + 2 = 4. But, I mean, we could look at Megumi and Haiji the same in regards to how their couples are portrayed canonically, which is they're not canon, but the fandom has enough subtext to treat them perhaps as such. So then looking at the stability and the ability to support their partners, Megumi has connections. He does know Gojo, and he does have the Zenin family name back there that he could kind of go fall back on if needed. Haiji clearly has a pretty upper class family and seems like he has the go-get-em and talent and drive to support their partner financially, depending on what job he ends up getting, like as a coach. So both of them, they would be able to support and protect you, I'm pretty sure. So that leads to the fan service. I would say that they're both pretty boys. They both have a decent amount of fan service. Both of them had 3% of the revote, so they're tied there. So then it comes down to looking at the original seeds. And Haiji was originally a second seed in this. And also there was a Patreon comment. There was a comment for Megumi and a comment for Haiji. But Megumi's comment was pretty general. Haiji's talked about how he can cook, he's motivated, he is emotionally intelligent and handsome, and an extremely good communicator and supporter. And that sold me. So commenter on Patreon, that's the comment that got Haiji through to the quarterfinals. He is going to advance beyond Megumi Fushiguro out of the Sweet 16 and on into quarterfinals. That was the easy round. That was easy. This next bit, my friends. The quarterfinals is probably the bloodiest bloodbath of them all. And I hate it. And I have dreaded this round. I got done with I'll be honest, I got done with the Sweet 16 to quarterfinals in like a day. I did my research, I did that, I was like, nope, that was easy. And then it took me a solid week to get through the quarterfinals sims. Because I hated it. So, again, going to be spoilers in these next few rounds. Also, I'm only talking about the parts of the series that I have watched myself, and we're basing it off the criteria as well. So, looking at the quarterfinals, round 1 is Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen versus Hawk from Yona the Dawn. Remember how I said I wasn't going to make friends? Here we are. Because Gojo is our number 1 seed and Hawk is our 3rd seed. But the criteria of the quarterfinals is the same as the criteria for the waifus. The quarterfinals is all about relationships and current bonds in the series, and looking at how the characters themselves have a strong emotional connection, show physical affection, respect the emotional, sexual, and physical boundaries of the characters, as well as exhibit unwavering commitment. And Gojo's hot, and Gojo's powerful, and Gojo is freaking rich. But does he have all the criteria with a current bond in the series in season 1? We shall see. So going forward to this, I looked at both Geto and Nanami and what we know from season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen versus Hawk alongside with Suwon and Yona in Yona of the Dawn, up through volume 22. And so this is where Gojo is going to struggle, because I only know Gojo from season 1. As for Hawk, I am up to volume 22 in terms of knowledge, and Hawk has a much stronger, more developed emotional relationship with the entire cast. Gojo, through a lot of Jujutsu Kaisen season 1, is not there. He's off on missions and is not present. He's just that mentor figure that shows up, is badass, and then checks out. Whereas Hawk is constantly through the entire manga from day 1. He never ducks out. He's pretty much there for 99% of the story. So you see him have a much stronger bond with all the other characters. Whereas Gojo, we get kind of more of a surface level bond. We don't really understand it nearly as much. Gojo has a connection with them, but he's the more mysterious mentor character of the group. And so we know a lot less about them. He's more like Suwon at this point. If I was comparing Gojo with anybody, Gojo is more like Suwon from Yona the Dawn, which fell back like rounds ago, back in like the original bracket. But I would say Hawk definitely has the advantage in terms of a strong emotional connection with Yona versus Gojo with either Nanami or Geto at this point from what we know. So as far as physical affection, Hawk wins this category. I know that there's history between Gojo and Geto, but there's just not enough at this point that I can go further with that character, whereas Hawk has all but confessed at this point that he loves Yona. I mean, he's done everything, whether it's been hug Yona, whether it's been hold her hand, whether it's been picking leeches off her body. Hawk has done a lot. So he definitely wins that category. And then we have respects the emotional, sexual, and physical boundaries. Hawk absolutely wins this category. Would Nanami have wanted a drawing of a penis sent to him? We can't be sure, but I'm not sure either that Megumi wanted Gojo's advances on him to go do private violin lessons either. So even if it was having violin lessons with Gojo, I'm not sure Megumi wanted that. So Gojo is more of a troll and at times doesn't quite respect those boundaries, whereas Hawk appears to be and definitely knows his boundaries and will respect them to the utmost extent. So that leaves us with the idea of the unwavering commitment, and Hawk for sure wins this category. Gojo's a fan favorite. I know a lot of people love his character, and in the looks department and sex appeal, I mean, he's given Hawk a run for his money, for sure. But if I'm wanting somebody that is going to stick around with me more than a fling, it ain't Gojo, it's Hawk. So I am sorry, Gojo fans. He made it to the quarterfinals, but he got stuck up against a beautiful husbando. Hawk, my dude, you are making it to the semifinals. So that leaves us with the next round of the quarterfinals, which is Makoto Tachibana versus Irwin Smith. Yep. Both 5 seeds, so they're both the 5th seeds going into this, which is a lot of fun. And this round was honestly a lot of fun to go through. Both of them had 3% of the revote. Both of them had the same 5th seed in the original vote. So Patreon was out. Could not rely upon Patreon for this one. It just had to come down to the categories within the rubric itself, which made this a lot of fun. So looking at the strong emotional connection, both of them have strong connections to the people that they are close to in this series, whether they are canon or subtextual. You could say that Irwin keeps himself somewhat at a distance from those he's close to throughout the series, whether it's for safety or personal ambition and reasons, whereas Makoto can distance himself at times, but he's usually front and center when someone's needs are needing to be met, and he can be an emotional confidant for anybody in the series at any time, whereas Irwin kind of keeps and plays things a little bit closer to the vest than Makoto. As far as showing physical affection, Makoto nor Irwin are surprisingly hugging characters. Neither of them are too physical, but Makoto does a great job of showing affection through gifts, through food, or just being there for other characters. Irwin can deliver a rousing speech that can offer solidarity for a comrade, but in the world of Attack on Titan, it doesn't leave a lot of room for physical affection in general, unless you're like grabbing a sword, unless you're grabbing a sword blade. So the closest we get with Irwin as far as physical affection goes is through his conversations with Levi and moments when they're extremely close and sharing dialogue together and kind of sharing this private space. That's the most we really get out of them in terms of that physical affection and connection. So Makoto kind of wins that category. And then there is definite respect for both characters in terms of boundaries with the people they are close to. Irwin and Makoto, both of them kind of tie in this category because they definitely know when to respect someone's boundaries and they don't push the envelope at the expense of other people. So that's really good to note. So then it comes down to unwavering commitment. And here's the thing. Irwin Smith does a great job of being committed to his ideals. But up until the end of his life, he really wasn't committed to a single person, but rather to his dreams and ambitions. And if it just so happened to align with the people of parody or with other people, then that's great. Whereas Makoto Tachibana literally devotes himself entirely to Haru and even aids others like Rin and Sosuke, but especially Haru in this series. So I feel that either Nanami or Irwin would struggle to compete with the sheer commitment that Makoto brings to the table. So if Nanami had won the last round, I think he would have struggled as well against Makoto for the same reasons. And how much Makoto would sacrifice to make sure that you got to your swim meet on time, that he had a meal ready for you when you came home, that he would make sure you were comfortably and emotionally stable. I feel like Makoto has shown throughout Free that he can be reliable and be there for his fellow characters. And not just Haru, but for Rin and for Sosuke and for others. Like, it doesn't matter about one person. Whereas with Irwin, really other than Levi and Hanji, really, maybe Mike, we don't see him truly devoted, and maybe Niall, we don't see him truly devoted to a lot of other characters, and he plays things a lot more closer to the vest and distances himself emotionally from others at times, whereas Makoto is always like open and there for you. So for that reason, as much as I love Irwin Smith, in terms of being a husbando that I could rely upon and that I would want to be a partner, it's going to be Makoto Tachibana to go on to the semifinals. So then we have, speaking of Attack on Titan, we've got Levi Ackerman versus Jean Kirstein. So this is interesting, right? So looking at, this is very interesting actually, because if you looked at the original seeds, Levi was first seed and Jean was second seed, but in the Patreon revote, we actually had Jean taking 9% of the vote and Levi taking 7% of the vote. So it kind of got flipped a little bit compared from February to June. So neither of them had comments about their characters either, so I couldn't go off of that. So decided to go through the rubric. Now, as far as strong emotional connections, Levi and Jean are shown to both have strong emotional connections to many characters within their series. So Levi's bond with Irwin and clear devotion to helping Eren shine before things happen in season 4. They do shine through, but then so does Levi working through his trauma to help his friends. Both have to forego themselves for the sake of those around them. So you could argue that Levi sacrifices himself to keep Irwin's promise, and you could also argue that Jean sacrifices the comfortable life and his ambitions in order to have solidarity and save his friends. So they're pretty even keel in terms of that. Now, as far as showing physical affection, Levi would never seem like someone who would show physical affection, unless it was Irwin. Whereas Jean is all too eager to show it. However, we've seen Levi at Irwin's side multiple times and kneeling beside him to help him come to a decision, you know, especially when he was like in season 3 making the decision to make the ultimate sacrifice and sacrifice his ideals for his people. So you have that with Levi. And then Jean has had similar dedication to the bones of those that he's lost and to those around him. So they're pretty equal in that regards as well. So then looking at respecting emotional, sexual, and physical boundaries, neither of them have really been in situations where that's had to come up. But I would argue both of them seem respectful enough that I think it would be okay. I think both of them would be able to treat their partners with similar respect. So then it comes down to unwavering commitment. Levi and Jean both show great commitment and have shown that they even take it post-mortem. Levi's taken that commitment post-mortem with keeping his promise to Irwin, and Jean has kept it post-mortem with Marco in siding with the enemy and having the talk during Night of the End that basically turned the entire story around. So this round is hard because I love both of these characters dearly, and I feel they both make good husbandos. So I had to turn to that final round. And honestly, I decided that I would go with the round that was the most recent. And as much as I love Levi, I've got to give it to our King Jean to make it to the semifinals. So, man, just getting our number 1 seeds booted out in the quarterfinals. But honestly, I think either Levi or Jean would have a hard time in this next round. But with that being said, Jean is going to advance on to the semifinals. And then we have our last round of the quarterfinals, and that is Dear Sweet Haiji versus Wanji. Our 1 seed versus our 2 seed. So yeah, this round. Now Haiji did have a comment. Wanji had 2. Wanji had in the second go round in the original poll, Gojo was the number 1 top seed, but in the second poll around, Wanji had 25% of the vote. Wanji had a lot. So Wanji was clearly, and Haiji had 3%. So there was a clear advantage going into this for Wanji. But I was like, I want to treat this fair and go through this bracket and treat it as honestly as possible. And so Haiji and Wanji both have strong emotional connections with those around them. Haiji literally chasing after Kakeru on his bike and staying by his side as an emotional support. And then Wanji, once Wushin returns, keeping him in sight and doing basically the same is great, right? So humorously enough, both Wushin and Kakeru have struggles in the series that they're in, and they're main characters with struggles, and especially with how they are perceived by those around them. Both characters struggle with that, and they end up needing the emotional support of their partners to keep them grounded, and that emotional support just has to come in the form of Wanji and Haiji. So it's funny how those 2 characters kind of have similar partners. Wushin and Kakeru are kind of similar in regards to their relationships with their partners of both Wanji and Haiji. So we looked at the next category, which is physical affection. Haiji does show a lot of physical affection. He holds his hand on Kakeru's shoulder and he steadies him, and he does get touchy. He does get touchy a bit. It is not nearly on the level that Wanji does with Wushin. There are whole chapters of Modao Zushi that are devoted to Wanji getting physical with Wushin, and nearly half of the Untamed's runtime was just Wanji holding on to Wushin. So that category clearly goes to Wanji. And as far as respecting emotional, sexual, and physical boundaries, both do this with aplomb. I mean, they both respect their partners, their boundaries. They do all they can to support and show understanding. Even when things get spicy with Wushin and Wanji, there is clear respect for the boundaries of those characters throughout the entire series. So both characters kind of win that category. And then exhibiting unwavering commitment. Wanji is the definition of unwavering commitment. The man bleeds agape. And once the confessions are made in Modao Zushi, he sweats Eros. So he bleeds agape and sweats Eros. Haiji's commitment is there, and the subtext of the relationship with Kakeru is all but confirmed, but there is no denying the bond that Wanji has with Wushin throughout the story and his commitment to him. So Haiji, my dude, you gave such a good run, but I'm going to get a refill, bring out Whiteboard Kun, and our boy Wanji, he is going to advance on to the semifinals. You know that movie, The Fantastic Adventures of Unico? I feel like this is the drink that the Baron tries to give Katie. That's all I can think of. So, we are ready to start the semifinals. I had to bring Whiteboard Kun out for the semifinal and finals because we are at the top 4 Husbando choices for 2022. And round 1 is dealing with Hawk, our 3rd seed, versus Makoto Tachibana, our 5th seed. So Makoto versus Hawk. And so I decided for this one, I went to psychcentral.com. They talked about different traits that any partner should have in a relationship. And like in the waifu video, they talked about 5 specific traits. Now, two of them were being a good listener and a good communicator. But you know at this point that all 4 husbandos that have made it this far are good listeners and good communicators. That part was fine. So what it came down to was the first criteria is, do they love themselves? According to Psych Central, couples often come into my office with the misconception that you should put your partner's needs before your own. The problem is that people will give until they have nothing left. This not only depletes the partners, but it also leads to resentment, hostility, and disconnection. Knowing your needs and taking care of yourself is key for your health and well-being. It also gives you the energy to be a good partner. So, do you love yourselves? Do you have self-worth? That's criteria number 1. Criteria number 2 is, do you stay attuned to your partner's needs? So, do you know what your partner needs? That's a very important function of a spouse or partner in a relationship. And then finally, do you understand 50-50 and the idea of compromise? So, with staying attuned to a partner's need, a good partner knows their partner's goals and dreams. They also know what their partner considers to be supportive and loving behavior. And then for understanding the meaning of 50-50, a common complaint with couples is that one partner is doing more of the work. So a 50-50 partnership is a committed relationship that differs from a business arrangement, essentially. There are peaks and valleys in every relationship, according to Psych Central. For instance, one partner may be attending school or struggling with a loss, and the other partner may pick up the missing pieces. However, as long as the roles do switch throughout the relationship, it's 50-50. So with Hawk and Makoto, we've got to look at, okay, how are we meeting these criteria and who maybe meets it more? So looking at loving themselves, I would argue that both Hawk and Makoto, they both have a decent sense of self-worth. Now, I think that both characters at various points in the series, Hawk especially at the beginning of the series, and surprisingly Makoto as we go on with the series, deal with this loving themselves. And Hawk deals with it at the very beginning because we find that he has a lot of guilt towards what's happened with Yona, but he ties it towards Suwon. But for the most part, Hawk does, have self-worth. And he is definitely, you could argue he's definitely more committed to making sure that Yona is happy and that she's okay. But I'd say that Hawk does have self-worth. He does deal with some guilt, and he does kind of neglect his own needs at times in the relationship, at least where I'm at in volume 22. But for the most part, he does a pretty good job. Makoto also has good self-worth and knows that he is a good person. At times, I would say that he does put his partner before himself. I would say there are times where he kind of puts his partner before himself. But Makoto, I think, actually might win this category because at one point, he knows that he's a good person for Haru, and he wants to help Haru, and he kind of ends up, he knows himself well enough to know that it's okay if Haru gets help from someone else. It's fine. And so he lets Rin go and take Haru to Australia. And so Makoto knows that he will be okay in the long run, letting Haru go through and deal with this. And so I think Makoto he loves himself enough that he knows that even though he can let Haru go off with someone else, it's not going to affect their relationship. So that's good. I'd say Makoto wins that category. But staying attuned to the partner's needs, Hawk, even though there's a lot of comedy and banter around the fact that him and Yona are not romantically on the same wavelengths at times, they're getting there. I'm so close. I can feel the confession bubbling, but we're not there yet in the manga. But it's coming. It's getting there, right? But Hawk does know what Yona needs for the most part, right? Obviously, there's some shenanigans and humor with what he's miscommunicating from Yona, especially as she starts to like him more and more. But he is very attuned to her needs, and he's always there for her if she needs something. And Makoto is there for others as well. But I would argue, like in the last movie, in Free the Final Stroke, Haru clearly needed somebody to communicate with him. And Makoto kind of dropped the ball just a little bit. Like, he went off to hang out with his siblings. Now, granted, Haru said he was in a good place, but Makoto wasn't quite attuned to Haru's needs in the moment during that movie. And that's been the most recent thing I've watched with Makoto. So I'm going to give this round to Hawk, because he seems to have more, especially as the manga goes on, even though for humorous effect, there are shenanigans with them misunderstanding the love that they have for each other romantically, he understands as a friend and a potential partner what Yona is going through and if she's in trouble or needs something. So there's that. And then finally, understanding the meaning of compromise and 50-50. Now, I'd say Hawk really excels in this category because Hawk and Yona, they are the definition of a compromising relationship. There's been so many moments during Yona of the Dawn where Hawk has had the opportunity that he could have been selfish, or he could have put his own desires ahead of Yona's, but he didn't. And there's times where Hawk is very honest with Yona. He's blunt. If he doesn't like something, he'll tell her. And if he wants to know something, he'll ask her. Now, there's, of course, like the humorous miscommunication where it comes to, like I said, romantically. But Hawk and Yona communicate very well, and they treat each other like equals. Like, he helps her train. He helps her spar. He wants to show off how great she is. And she does vice versa with him. So they very much have an awesome 50-50 relationship in the manga. Even as far as I'm only on volume 22, it's there. Makoto gives all of himself. And I would say that if Makoto had a weakness, it's that he really sacrifices a lot of himself, and that kind of ties to self-worth. And you'd think that since he won that category, he'd win down here. But I would argue that since he gives so much of himself, he oftentimes tries to take on more than he can chew, and it leads to things happening in the series that maybe could have prevented if he just let that person just go and didn't try to like do everything for them. So I love Makoto, but I've got to give that round to Hawk. And I think overall, in terms of just being someone that is a better partner to a significant other, I think Hawk just checks off more of the boxes. Makoto is a great husbando. He is. I would date Makoto in a heartbeat. But if I had the choice between dating Makoto and Hawk, I think that at the end of the day, Hawk would maybe treat me more as an equal, and Makoto would try to just kind of be the one to do more in the relationship. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but in meeting with the criteria, I think Hawk meets it more, and he's going to be our winner to advance on into our finals. But you gave it a good run, Makoto. You did your best, and we can't ask for anything more. We still love you, and we would definitely let you be our husbando if we had the choice. So that leads, for the second round of the semifinals, we have old Wanji, Long Wanji, our first seed, versus Jean Kirstein, our second seed. Again, I feel bad for nearly anyone up against Wanji. This is a tough round. I feel bad for Jean. I do. Because if we talk about loving ourselves, I really think that this is where Jean struggles. Jean has had to fight all of Attack on Titan to be comfortable in his leadership. It's something that Marco told him from the very start of the series that he was great at, that he was a great leader. He understood how people felt when they felt like failures. He could relate to them, but it is something that Jean has struggled with the entire series, and he still struggles with it, but he has gained a lot more confidence, but he struggled with it throughout most of the series. That idea of his self-worth and believing he's good enough to be a captain and lead in that series, that's something he struggled with, and he's done fine with it, but it's definitely been something he's had to deal with in terms of like a weakness. Wanji kind of goes through the same thing, where he questions whether or not he's worthy of Wushin. And he questions whether he's actually, going to be able to give in that relationship. And so I do think, though, in terms of his overall self-confidence, Wanji has a lot more of it than Jean. I think that in the end, Wanji definitely, even though Wanji has some moments of self-doubt, I think throughout the relationship, or he has moments where he's not quite sure if what Wushin is saying is real, or if he's misunderstanding, or he has moments where he's questioning, his clan and their whole ideologies versus what Wanji feels. There are lots of moments like that, but I think in terms of loving themselves and having self-worth, Wanji does not struggle with it nearly as much as Jean does in Attack on Titan. So Wanji kind of edges out in terms of that category. So then we have staying attuned to their partner's needs. Again, this is where Jean, and I would argue Chuya, would struggle with as well. Chuya, in terms of he's not really around Dazai enough, and they always banter and stuff. But in terms of Jean versus Wanji, I think that Wanji, he makes a point. He makes a point to be attuned. He wants to make sure that Wushin is as comfortable as possible, that his pillow princess is going to get what she deserves, right? Whereas Jean's whole problem is that he can't focus on a specific partner. right? There's not simply one that he focuses on. And sometimes he gets lost in himself and kind of forgets what that partner needs. So whether it's Marco, whether it's Mikasa, whether it's Peak, whether it's Reiner, but in most of the series, Jean, he doesn't really have any opportunities given to us where he can really focus on those needs. I mean, he tries to help out his friends when they need him for leadership, but that's different than something romantic. So we just don't have enough information to really give us with Jean, whereas with Wanji, we have several chapters where we see Wanji like staying attuned, watching over Wushin, being attentive to him, being like, what do you need? Are you okay? Like Wanji, he's been at Wushin's side so many times, and we just don't see that with Jean. And so then we have the idea of understanding 50-50. And I would say that Wangshin in general is like the definition of 50-50. It's like the definition. It's literally these two characters coming together from different worlds in the same timeline, and they have different ideas about the relationship, but they come together beautifully, and they compromise, they sacrifice for each other, they respect each other's boundaries, they are able to communicate to each other what each other likes, they meet each other halfway. It's beautiful. It's like the definition of a compromise. It's like a perfect blend. Whereas Jean, I will say that Jean, when it comes to his relationships, when it comes to him being in relationships, he does do a lot of compromise. I will say that. Jean does do that as well. Especially towards season 4 and part 2, there are several situations where Jean is forced to make difficult decisions involving the people that he cares about. And he has to compromise a lot of his own ambitions, a lot of his own goals, but it is in service of helping out his friends and for the greater good. So I would argue that both Jean and Wanji meet in terms of this understanding the compromise and the 50-50. But, I mean, looking at all the categories as a whole, Wanji's just hard to beat. It's going to be hard in the next round. It's going to be so hard. But yeah, I love Jean. He is our king. He's one of my favorite characters of Attack on Titan. But Wanji is my favorite character of Modazushi. So, y'all, it's Wanji. So he's going to advance on into the finals. Oh, God. Oh, buddy. To say this is not the toughest final is an understatement. I don't think a lot of you realize just how good Yona of the Dawn is in terms of giving us one of the most perfect husbandos, because it has. Hawk is nearly perfect, but then so is Wanji. So I feel like going into this bracket, Wanji was the clear number 1 seed, and he was clearly the more popular on Patreon, but I think that was solely because more people have watched Modazushi than have watched Yona of the Dawn. Should you watch Yona of the Dawn? Hell yes, you should. Should you read reading the manga to get more of this man? Yes, you should. So, you know, I have to view them not in terms of being a popularity contest in this regard, because we're at the final at this point. Now, in terms of popularity, there is a clear distinction between Wanji and Hawk. There's a 3rd seed versus 1st seed, but we're talking about criteria here. We're talking about the best of the best. And so it can't just be a popularity contest. We've got to go with the overall combination of attributes between these two characters. So let's just get a few things right out of the bag. Both of these characters are physically strong. I mean, there is no question that both of these characters are going to be able to protect you. Hawk is the Thunder Beast. Lan Wangji is one of the strongest cultivators. They're both going to save you in a situation. They're both utterly devoted. That is the thing too. They're both utterly devoted characters. They both consider Yona and Wushin to be the end all be all, and it is only really them. Well, here's the thing. There is a caveat. There's kind of I'm going to kind of go up here to the side and say that there's 2 caveats to this about that devotion. One kind of goes into Wanji's favor, and one kind of goes into Hawk's favor, so it does not help me break the tie at all. Not at all, but it needs to be said, right? So I say only, and that's really not true for Hawk. Hawk also has a strong devotion, or maybe it does work in Hawk's favor. Hawk has a strong devotion towards Suwon and the other dragons. Now, again, I talked about spoilers. If you're reading the manga, I'm up to volume 22 at this point. I think the Hawk has a love for Yona, romantically, sexually, But like soulmate level, I think it's not only for Yona, but also for Suwon as well. And he loves his fellow brother dragons very much so. Wanji, it's really only for Wushin. It is really only for Wushin. Wanji only has eyes for him. They are an OT. They are literally the OTP of OTPs. I could not picture Wanji with anyone else. I don't think anybody in the fandom pictures Wanji with anyone else. I don't think it's possible. Or at least if you say you are, you're a liar. So I just don't see Wanji with anybody else except Wushin. That's the thing. However, because of that, Wanji devotes himself solely to Wushin. He really doesn't quite care about anybody else except maybe Sishui and his brother and uncle. I mean, Chang, he doesn't really care for Chang. Wanji, he's just cordial towards everybody else. But he really only has eyes for Wushin. Whereas I think Hawk develops some strong bonds with multiple characters. But depending on how you view husbandos, if you're like, no, I want my husbando to be has only eyes for me, then yeah, Wanji's going to win that category. But if you want your husbando to be a little bit more well-adjusted at dinner parties, then it's probably going to be Hawk, right? Because here's the thing, too. If we're going to talk about, like, the situation, Hawk can party. Wanji cannot. Not a partier. And again, that depends on your preference as well. So if you don't want a partier husbando, then Wanji's going to be perfect. If you're fine with your husbando partying, Hawk's going to be perfect. So it kind of just depends. But also, I want to point out something, and this is a very big point that is in favor of Hawk in this circumstance. And that is Hawk's devotion. Hawk's devotion is for the entirety of the series. For the whole series so far, he has been by Yona's side since volume 1 and has been utterly devoted to her. It's been known throughout the entire series that he's loved her, just like it's been known throughout Monaozushi that Wanji loves Wushin. However, Wanji and Hawk, both of them hide their affection for the other person. Hawk, out of a sense of duty, doesn't want Yona to know that he loves her, so he just passes off that, oh, I'm your bodyguard, this is just me protecting you, it's not a thing. Wanji, for reasons like because of his uncle and because of his own personal reasons, does not want to let on that he likes Wushin. However, I would argue Wanji does leave Wushin for a good portion of Modaozushi prior to him getting resurrected. So before Wushin comes back in Mojan Yu's body, there are big periods of time where Hawk's not there for Wushin. He's not, for various circumstances. And it's not necessarily Wanji's fault, but he's just not there. That's just the fact of the matter. Whereas Hawk, no, he is by Yona's side. And when he is not by Yona's side, we know it. We, the audience, there are a few times in Yona the Dawn where Hawk is in a situation where he can't be by her and he's thinking about her nonstop. He's constantly being like, I wonder if she's okay. Can somebody check on her? He is constantly wanting to make sure she's fine. Whereas with Wanji and Modaozushi, when he disappears, we're looking at the story from Wushin's perspective. So we don't know what Wanji's doing or what he's thinking. We don't know. So I do think that that is a big thing that is in Hawk's favor, is that he's always been with Yona since the start of the series. They've been childhood friends. They grew up together. He's had this love for her from a young age. And Wanji has had this love for Wushin, but it really doesn't come out in the wash until after Wushin's resurrected, right? Until after he comes back. So in terms of that, Hawk's kind of got a little bit of advantage. Now, as far as actually the love thing, I'm not read far enough to know if Hawk confesses or not. I don't know. There is a confession with Wanji. Now, here's the thing too with that though. With this confession, Wanji was not the one that confessed. Wushin was the one that confessed. Wushin fessed up and confessed his love first to Wanji, and Wanji just agreed with everything and repeated it, and then it was set in stone and things were fine. With Hawk and Yona, I think there's going to be a confession. It's not set in stone, so I can't exactly use it as criteria, but the majority of this story with Yona of the Dawn, a big portion of this has been through Hawk's perspective. That is the one advantage that Hawk does have over Wanji in terms of the stories that they are in, is that we see a good chunk of Yona of the Dawn from Hawk's perspective. There have been chapters that are from Hawk's point of view where Hawk tells us how he feels about Yona, why he's not confessed to her, and what's holding him back from sharing his love for her. We've seen those chapters from Hawk's perspective, and that leads me to believe that Hawk is going to be the one to confess when it happens. I think Hawk will be the one to confess his love when it happens. Yona's too shy. Yona's kind of shy like Wanji. She's going to be like, I don't see her confessing first. I see it being Hawk. Hawk's going to be the one to confess. Wanji, we don't get the story from his perspective. We get chapters that are told to us, and sadly, some of the most important chapters that convince Wushin to confess aren't even told to him by Wanji. They're told to him by his brother Jishin. So you don't even get them from Wanji himself telling Wushin. You just hear them later from Jishin to Wushin to convince him to confess. So it's such a moot point, I feel like. I feel like we can't truly treat the confession because, one, Wushin was the one that confessed, not Wanji, even though Wanji agreed with it. But two, I can't use Hawk to win that category either because it's not happened yet. It's just my speculation, right? So we have to go with other things. In terms of being devoted as well, Wanji did brand himself. He did brand himself and take lashes for defending Wushin. Hawk did leave his tribe to protect Yona and devote himself to her, so I don't know. But here's the thing. Yona hasn't died in that series like Wushin has, so it's kind of a different circumstance as well. So it gets very hard in that regard too. Both of them are great communicators in terms of when they need to be. It's funny because both Hawk and Wanji, they're on a regular day, they're not very talkative, right? They're not talkative characters. I will say this too. Hawk communicates much more to Yona than Wanji does to Wushin. A lot of the communication in Modao Zushi is Wushin to Wanji because Wanji is just not a big talker. He's just not. Like I said, most of the communication is Wushin to Wanji, or it's a family member or a friend talking about Wanji to Wushin, right? Hawk communicates a lot in Yona the Dawn. If there is something up, he talks to her. He seeks her out and finds her and initiates conversations. He initiates physical intimacy with her. So that is another thing too, right? He initiates physical affection. Now, you could argue with me. You could be like, well, Wanji kissed Wushin. And I'd be like, yes, he did kiss Wushin under the tree, but he didn't tell Wushin that he kissed him. He did it while he was blindfolded and like asleep. He did this kiss there, and then he took out half a forest in anger about it later. Whereas Hawk has initiated a lot of physical affection, whether it's been hugging her, whether it's been holding her, whether it's been holding her hand, whether it's been kissing her forehead, whether it's been like nuzzling his head into her hair. Like he's all but said, I love you. And he did say I love you to her. That's the thing. In volume 22 and I actually just read volume 23. I actually read volume 23 last night. He did say that he loved her. So he said it out loud first before Wanji. So there's that, right? Yeah. So Hawk has just been more of a communicator of his physical affection and love, and just is utterly devoted. I love Wanji to a T, and he is so popular. And Wanji is an amazing partner. Now, obviously in the extra chapters, Wanji and Wushin, they get it on. So if you're talking about physicality for Husbando, then yeah, Hawk is going to win that category, or Wanji is going to win that category, absolutely, because we actually have content of them being physical together, and it's spicy and great. But I've got to put that on here, I guess. But in terms of overall, it's really difficult because you have Wanji and Hawk, who are both utterly devoted to the characters that they are paired with. And they do such a good job in the series that each of them are in showing that devotion and love. Now, obviously, we get more with Wanji in terms of the spiciness and that love actually being consummated and going into the sexual realm. But at the same time, you have Hawk showing everything else but that, right? So it's really hard, and I feel like I am at a disadvantage a little bit because I haven't read all of the manga with Hawk and Yona to know any further. But what we have got, I do appreciate that Hawk has taken more of an initiative to engage in physical intimacy with Yona even if it's something as simple as kissing her forehead or nuzzling her head or saying I love you out loud. He said that to her, right? Now, whether she heard it or not is different, but Wanji, the confession came to him from Wushin, and then he repeated it back, right? So I think that is a big difference. And then Hawk has always been by Yona's side, followed her since volume 1, and Wanji, despite being an amazing husbando, has not been with Wushin throughout the entire series and has been at odds with him on multiple occasions, whereas Hawk has never been at odds with Yona. He's always been next to her and been with her. And if I can quote one Patreon commenter who said, quote, Hawk is 1000% husbando material. And both he and Wanji had 2 side votes in the Patreon poll as well. So it's very difficult because I've seen all of Modao Zushi and I know all of Wanji. He's my favorite character in Modao Zushi. I've seen 23 volumes now of Yona the Dawn. I kept saying 22 throughout this video. I've read the 23rd volume. I just read it the other night. So yeah. So you know what? Yes, the saying is that actions speak louder than words. And I feel like Hawk has done both. He has spoken the words out loud to Yona. He has done all of the actions. I love Wanji to pieces, and he's definitely the more popular character on here. And him and Wushin are an OTP, but so are Hawk and Yona. And so, you know what? We're gonna keep them together. Hawk is gonna be our winner. Hawk is gonna be our winner in the finals. Our boy Hawk, the 3rd seed, coming out of nowhere. He is going to be our King Husbando for 2022. So it was really, really hard. And there's part of me that wants to give it to Wanji, but if you've read Yona of the Dawn, Hawk is just the ultimate husbando. He's so freaking good. It's just so hard. So I love Wanji to pieces, and if he makes it back next year, I'm sure he's gonna probably make it to the top and win the poll. But we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, so Hawk and Yona of Yona of the Dawn, they are our husbando and waifus of 2022. Was this a giant plug for y'all to go watch Yona of the Dawn and read it? You should. It wasn't intended to be when I started this, but you definitely should give that series a look. It's absolutely amazing, especially if you're looking for a top primo husbando such as our boy son Hawk. So yeah, I'm glad to finally be done with this bracket for this year. Thank God. Cheers, friends. I'm sorry it took me so long to finish the husbando bracket. It literally was months behind schedule, but if I do this again next year, I'm probably going to start like in November getting nominations and that way maybe by February I can start recording and it will not be so tragic. So I hope you all enjoyed this bracket. I hope your favorites made it through. I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. I know there's going to be a lot of Wanji fans that are going to be mad he didn't win. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't do it. You all need to, if you like Wanji, you need to read Yona of the Dawn and see Hawk, because our boy Hawk, it's just good stuff. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope you all enjoyed this video. But I am excited for more videos to come out this summer. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon, y'all, with more reaction. Cheers.